Dr. G back with part 3 of our digital lecture slash asynchronous conversation with students, asking their weekly reading discussion questions with relation to COM 42143 digital media literacy. We're talking about a pair of texts and seeing how students want to engage those. May brings up an interesting thought or two here that I will read. How is it that the English language can be changed so easily? We have celebrities that make up words or writers that come up with sayings, and bam, it is a new expression. I like what you did there, May. I saw that. The English language is already complicated, and it seems we are making it harder. How did we come from drawings to words, back to drawings, emojis? It almost seems like we are going forward, however, backwards. Yes, I think in this question relates to that Danisi video that we dropped the link into, embedded into D2L for you all. But language works in cycles. I think you're hitting the nail on the head there, right? What's old is new, and we will continue to see that with language. That's a definite, and you just got to roll with it. Or then, as we say in American culture, we're old now, right? I'm too old to worry about those rules. So let's look at a couple of questions from Seth. He's got some that I can rapid fire here. Has the digital age changed the English language, especially in America? Yes, 100%. All right. Has punctuation and grammar been put on the back burner with the younger generation because of social media? There's room for that argument. I think the follow-up question naturally be, who counts as younger people? Who is the younger generation you speak of? And another question, with so many different platforms for people to write on, are opinions more important than facts? I circled that word important when I saw it, and I wrote, or valuable. Arguably, we place higher value on opinions rather than facts in a lot of our news cable news era that we're still experiencing, because opinions are kind of like sexier or louder or more controversial than the dry facts and statistics and evidence that can be gathered to prove or disprove something. One of the terms we try to work with throughout the major is talking to you all and having this discussion about making arguments, or the flip side of that, argumentative fallacies, right? The types of arguments that are innately error filled and plague us from actually practicing strong communication, perhaps practicing its opposite intentionally. And one of the things we have to be careful for is understanding what types of information presentation is leading to an argumentative fallacy, right? And that is to say, an untruth. Remember, maybe we don't remember, about a decade ago, the word of the year was truthiness. Man, we're getting closer, maybe to 15 years on that, but truthiness. And this was this idea of, it was a joke, it was a satirical use of a term, but also an understood idea that a lot of people out there that use media professionally are not necessarily in the business of telling the truth, right? Little t truth. We're not trying to answer questions of the universe here, but that is something we have to tackle and grasp, and understanding why certain types of information is presented to us in certain manners is an important step. Okay, so that is a partial definition for us having this conversation about digital media literacy. Has the power of popular culture and social media has the power of pop culture and social media affected outcomes in the government? Affected or effected? Could be both. But we might reword that to suggest how have they? Not simply have they, but how have they? Okay, I think it's really easy. This is yet another, it's kind of a closed-ended question where one can just drop in a yes and move on. So we want to be careful with the question writing, that we're opening a conversation here. How have they would be an appropriate way to, like, how has popular culture and social media played this role in the government? And first of all, let's look at how the landscape has changed. Landscape has become the mediascape, right? Every politician is sounding off on social media now. They see that's a powerful enough tool. The swing states, whether we're saying, things that could be, understood as appropriate or its opposite. And so, yes, everyone's using that tool, and there's been a groundswell. In fact, if you're not using it, what are you doing? And I think that salience has become a de facto stance. Culture, U.S. culture currently demands that we have that immediate presence. And certainly in the political realm, that's as important for their stakes and stakeholders as ever. With everything going digital, will newspapers ever become relevant again? And not to discount the relevancy of newspapers, but I think we can recognize that physical media has transitioned. And any one that didn't transition, at least partially. So what we mean, and this is one of our books, right? This is one of our books in the major, the spreadable media text. Anyone that's not adopting that spreadable media policy is going to have a hard time sticking around. And part of that spreadable media campaign would be having those digital arms. But for a lot of them, digital, it represents the future, at least the present future. And there's a practicality to it, but there's also an infrastructure that we've been massively investing in now for decades to provide that service from here on out, right? For the foreseeable future, at least. And unlike that, paper is a finite resource. And it does have to do with goods and services and commodity exchange, right? Like, I'm thinking of another economic law, but supply and demand, right? Where's the demand? Are the newspapers the demand? Do we want the ink on on our fingertips anymore? It's more of a kind of experiential thing for probably a decreasing few. And where's that gonna swing and turn back around? Do you want information and news to come to you slower in the future, or do you want to continue to get it like faster and faster? And I think we're headed in that direction, for better or worse. So can there be a role for newspapers in the future? Sure. What's it going to look like? Whatever it looks like, it's going to be different from how it played a role traditionally. Kimberly asks, with regards to writing well in the 21st century, from Spencer, on page 2, how do we keep up with all the changes in writing? All right, so I feel you. Thank you for the transparency there. It's a great question because it's important we have those kinds of conversations. But for Kimberly and others, how do we keep up with all these changes? And I feel like everyone's always correcting me, right? Or I'm always behind. I know that's how systems work, right? That's how society functions. We're always meant to feel like we're behind, especially in a consumer culture. That's how, it's the dangling rabbit, the carrot stick. I said the dangling rabbit. Different mixing metaphors here. How do we keep up with all the changes in writing specifically? Well, here's my shorthand advice. Stay flexible. Stay flexible because you don't know what position, what's going to be asked of you next. Do not overly depend on one form. All right, be open to that change and understanding that progress. So stay flexible. Don't overly depend on one form of writing, and then do your best. Do your best. If we're doing our best, we're staying flexible. We're not overly dependent on a singular method. I think we're going to be moving right along with everyone in these situations. All right, page 5. With all of the fake news on the internet, besides using critical thinking skills, how do we know what we have found are true facts to share? This is this gets at the heart of this course. This is a great question. Now, on a practical side, on an efficiency side, there now are multiple websites whose sole purpose is to help us with that. Something like Snopes.com or .org. It is designed to help give us that fact checking. I challenge you all. We're about to enter yet another enormous election cycle, and we're just going to be bombarded with information and dirty tactics. The methods of the political elite haven't changed over the the practices, the ethics of the political elite haven't changed over the years. It's the methods, right? It's the mediums that have changed, and so we just have to continuously be savvy enough to really follow up on that. But there are great websites that help us fact check, and fact checking is also a skill we can acquire. So just like a journalist, this is not a pure journalism major, but it's journalism adjacent. Like, we're doing things in conversation with journalists. We're training you in a way that you could potentially quickly move down that path if it were something you were pursuing. But we're not trying to just narrowly focus on it, because guess what? That's a narrow field of employment now too. And so we're working on multiple types of, areas of professional development and the communication media and ethics major at MacU. But fact checking is something we can do. When you're looking at multiple sources, first of all, look at multiple sources on a given story, and are all of them just repeating one another? Are they all just relying on the same single source? The original, what we call primary source, was the validity of that primary source, right? So if it's a hearsay, this is why, what do you call it, like a source, an anonymous source, is tricky, because we have to depend on the credibility of the journalist to then depend on the credibility of the source, that they're doing their job in vetting their source. But then there are certain stuff that can be scientifically aggregated, right? We're talking data analytics people, we're talking the scientific method, and certain types of information can be verified. And so this is what I was talking about earlier, and I got lost down the trail. But when some people on cable news, let's just keep beating this because it's going to be that thing, right, that's in front of us all when it comes crunch time. People try to say, well, there's two sides to any story, or there's two sides to any position, or I'm sorry, two sides to any argument, and it's like, well, and sometimes that could mean there's a right side of it, there's a correct side to it, there's an incorrect side to it. But by just trying to frame it as that, well, there's two sides to every story. that is actually not answering said question by saying it. So that's an example of argumentative fallacy. And you should have like, your dog ears should go up when you hear people say that on news, because it's usually a red alert, as what we call a right. When I said that, it's like a dog whistle, because it's letting the base know, oh, I'm about to take your side if you think you're being alienated by this conversation. And I'm not trying to speak for all issues or all instances of saying that. That's why it's tricky, and that's why the question's so great. It's subjective, right? Okay, we'll take one more break and we'll hit some final questions here. So sit tight.